Wizards HQ, the #1 coding school for kids and teens ages 8 to 18. These virtual teacher-led classes have a student success rate that's 15 times better than self-paced video courses and tutorials. Whatever your child's interests, these computer programming skills will prepare them to thrive in a technologically advanced world that's changing every day. Go online to codewizardshq.com and use offer code marketplace to get 10% off your first month.
If I wanted to go with a Halloween season theme here, and I do, I'd say today's show has a dark and scary night, the ghost of Toys R Us, and the invasion of the social media body snatchers. Also, the stock market. Terrifying. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace. In Oakland, I'm Molly Wood, in for Kai Risdall. It's Tuesday, October 8th. Good to have you with us. We're starting today here in California, where the lights will go out for close to 1 million people starting around midnight tonight. It is hot, dry, and windy in Northern California, and the state's largest electric utility, Pacific Gas and Electric, says it'll turn off the power to prevent fires. Its power lines have caused or potentially caused several devastating wildfires in recent years. But this will be by far the state's biggest preventative power outage. And as climate change makes fire seasons, hurricanes, and extreme weather worse across the country, this isn't an isolated story for homes, schools, and businesses. Marketplace's Megan McCarty-Carino has more on what happens when the plug gets pulled.
Becky Urbano is keeping a close eye on her phone, so long as it still has juice. The Oakland resident has been alerted her home and 2 kids' schools could lose power in the outage.
Really, we're kind of on call. If power goes out, we have to go get the kids and they come home. There's really no other option for us.
Work will have to take the back seat for Urbano's family and much of the region. A report from utility research firm eSource found power outages cost U.S. businesses an estimated $27 billion a year. Catherine Wolfram is an expert on energy policy at UC Berkeley, which is also bracing for the outage. She says events like these can really cripple business.
It's just not something that our economy is equipped to deal with.
At the university, she says experiments have been canceled and the labs will have to throw out some perishable materials. Outages can have outsized effects on industries that rely on refrigeration, like healthcare and food services. In parts of the world where electricity is unreliable, Wolfram says businesses have no choice but to incorporate the cost of backup power into their budgets, upwards of $10,000 for a commercial generator.
That becomes essentially like a tax on the economy.
It's a cost that Nick's restaurant in Paradise, California, is willing to pay. The town was almost completely destroyed in the state's deadliest wildfire in history last year. Now, the restaurant's got a backup generator to the backup generator, says kitchen manager Joe Pickett.
So that our food stays good and we can still run paninis and a coffee machine. And it's a time and age where we've got to be ready for anything that comes.
Part of the new business as usual for fire-weary residents. I'm Megan McCarty-Carino for Marketplace.
Toys R Us shut down entirely in 2018 after filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy with more than $5 billion of debt on its books. My 7-year-old niece still isn't over it. But the ghost of Toys R Us lives on. If you head to the Toys R Us website, which yes, still exists, and you try to buy something, it will redirect you to Target.com. That's right, Target and the creditors that own the Toys R Us brand have struck a holiday shopping deal. Marketplace's Marielle Segura explains.
After Toys R Us shut down last year, the brand name was left in the hands of the creditors that had lent money to the company.
Effectively a cohort of banks that are now in the toy business.
Stephanie Wissink is a managing director at Jeffries. Now those banks are trying to figure out how to make money off the Toys R Us brand.
And it's a very challenging thing to do because their infrastructure was totally dismantled last year.
James Zahn, senior editor at the Toy Book, says creditors are opening a handful of small stores, and through this deal with Target, they're monetizing the name itself. Say it's the holidays. I'm looking for a toy for my cousin's kid. I think to myself, is Toys R Us still around? And I try the website. Murli Goki, a managing director at Alex Partners, says there are a lot of people who do this.
I wouldn't do that. Toys R Us being one of the top names that they would go and he would go
So back to my cousin's kit. I'm on ToysRUs.com, looking around. Click on the action figure category. 818 results. Oh, nice. There's a Black Widow version and Mrs. Potato Head. Click on that. And underneath, there's a button that says, buy now at Target.com. The toy will come from Target's inventory. Target will ship it to me. Toys R Us is operating in name only. We don't know exactly how much Target paid for this deal, but Stephanie Wissink at Jefferies says there's a lot of potential business here.
Almost $500 million of Toys R Us' total business was online. And I think that certainly from a Target perspective, they want to get as much of that $500 million as possible.
Because Target is competing with Walmart and Amazon to fill the void Toys R Us left when it shut down. I'm Marielle Sierra for Marketplace.
On Wall Street today, the U.S. blacklisted dozens of Chinese companies, and hopes for trade talks this week were dim. Stocks fell. In Europe, stocks fell for all the same reasons, plus a fresh set of hell around Brexit. We've got details on the Brexit drama in this week's Make Me Smart podcast, hosted by me and Kai Rizdal, and details on the market drama when we do the numbers. For the last several months or so, over on my show, Marketplace Tech, we've been asking what the tech industry can do to help us adapt to climate change. And so far, we focused on companies, but today we're going to focus on people. Because Silicon Valley, home of the tech industry, is also a microcosm of economic and racial inequality. And that is a climate change story too. Here in Silicon Valley, you see this dynamic playing out in the tiny town of East Palo Alto. It's sandwiched in between Palo Alto, home of Stanford, and Menlo Park, which is where you'll find Sand Hill Road and venture capital millions. But it doesn't really benefit from any of that.
Let's be honest, East Palo Alto has been the city that has been left out of the equation on many occasions.
Lisa Gaucher is the mayor of East Palo Alto. Its streets are crowded with tech commuter traffic just passing through. Its median house price is about $1 million. The median income is about $52,000 a year. People have been pushed out.
A lot of our residents are still, they're not qualified or not able to get the jobs that will pay them a living wage and allow them to stay in their community.
The city has approximately 30,000 residents. It's a mostly Black and brown community with a higher poverty rate than the national average, despite sitting in one of the richest counties in the U.S. East Palo Alto is also at risk from climate change. Half of it is in a flood zone. Any major rainstorm causes streets to close, sewers to overflow, and streets to fill up with water. And East Palo Alto isn't prepared to adapt to worsening climate change.
We started listening to the community leaders, and there was a big gap on adaptation planning.
Violet Saena works for the nonprofit Actera, which works to get green tech like solar panels and energy efficient windows to low-income communities. She said in some cases, the tech to make homes more resilient, like more energy efficient as temperatures get hotter, is available to people for free, but it's hard to get it to them.
The information is only available online. Homeowners are elderly homeowners who don't have access to Wi-Fi or a computer. When it comes to the application itself, it's like a 10-page, and they ask for your family's income. All of this paperwork, it really discourage people to apply.
Saena says her organization can get people really big subsidies to switch to electric vehicles that they can power for free with low-cost solar panels, but people tell her that tech just isn't for them.
When they see an electric vehicle or a Tesla, because we do ride and drive events where people can come and see these electric vehicles, you can even drive them. The one thing they say, that's for rich men. We cannot afford that.
And then there are those in East Palo Alto who say they don't want to be guinea pigs for tech that they didn't have input in developing.
Community engagement is not true community engagement if you aren't sharing power.
Ofelia Bayo is the executive director of Youth United for Community Action, an environmental justice group in East Palo Alto. It's a place where kids gather to talk about what battles to fight in the community. A few years back, they managed to help kick out a hazardous waste facility that had been polluting groundwater in East Palo Alto. And also to do things like work on their resumes and get mentorship and advice.
No, the resume, like on job, new job.
I wrote it.
Bayo says the tech industry needs to get engaged on climate change.
In that same breath, though, tech has a huge social responsibility to the neighboring cities that they operate in, even their host cities that they operate in, because they simply have the means to do something about it.
But she echoed a fear we heard often, that solutions will come at too high a price.
You don't try to solve a climate crisis by extracting more wealth and selling clean air in a can to people who can afford it, right? Or whatever the wonky solution, weird solution is.
To be sure, no solutions, wonky or otherwise, seem to be coming from the tech industry right now. But just last month, East Palo Alto did get a $4.4 million federal grant to improve roads and drains and protect the city from future flooding. You can hear more from that series, How We Survive, about how tech is and isn't helping us adapt to climate change. You'll find it all at marketplace.org/climate. With the 2020 election on the horizon, social media is still considered a crucial tool for candidates and journalists during the campaigns. But as we hopefully learned from the last election and all the months since then, bots and fake accounts are flooding the social media zone to amplify false information or create division and discord. Filippo Mencer is a professor of informatics and computer science at Indiana University. He estimates that around 10 to 15% of accounts on Twitter are fake, despite the company's efforts to shut them down. And those accounts have a big impact on what we think is true. Filippo, thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So let's just get super specific. I mean, how big a problem is that, considering that so many journalists use Twitter, so many political candidates are using Twitter to see how their messages are resonating?
We believe that it is an important problem because the platforms and we, the users of the social media platforms, are vulnerable to manipulation. Those could have real world implications, for example, on, when we go to vote. But it's hard to prove that causal chain of events. We do know, however, that bots can be used effectively to manipulate what information we are exposed to online and to make it look like certain things are trending and to generate the appearance that some people or some ideas are particularly popular. And that can also trick journalists, because if they then think that this is what people are talking about, then they can cover it, and that generates a second wave of attention.
Right. And then tell me why it's so hard to solve this problem, to even detect these bots, let alone get rid of them.
Yeah, it is a very difficult problem. First of all, platforms are inundated with these kinds of abuse. So even if you have a very good machine learning algorithm that detects the great majority of them, even missing just a few, that will still have millions, many millions of potentially fake accounts. And many of them use humans to actually generate the content, so that you cannot easily spot patterns of bots. And then finally, the platforms can pay a huge price for suspending an account, because even if it was using for abuse, it is hard to prove. The person who was using those bots can then say, look, I'm a human, I posted these things myself. And it is very difficult to prove otherwise.
How many followers does a bot need before it can have a significant impact on our online conversations?
We've tried to explore that question by building a model that simulates a social media network. So we actually measured the amount of damage that bots can do in such a network. And it seems that when roughly around 1% or so of the humans follow a bot, then there is a very big transition from a situation in which the bots have not so much of an effect to a situation in which they have a huge effect. So if I want to target a particular community, for example, people who are vulnerable to conspiracy theories, Then I can create a bunch of bots that for a while just retweet and mention people in this community, and they follow them, and then they get followed. And after a while, they can become integral part of that community. And at that point, they can basically control it.
Well, and there's an effort now, a law in California, and a discussion about maybe federal efforts to sort of force bots to identify themselves when they're interacting with people, especially around political messaging. What are the complications around that solution?
I believe that that seems like a very reasonable thing, but there are those who argue that this is an infringement on First Amendment, that bots somehow have free speech rights. The idea is that there is somebody behind those bots, and those people should not be limited in what they say. On the other hand of the spectrum, there are opinions, including mine, that say that if you don't impose any limits on that kind of speech, then you are allowing people to suppress other people's speech, because I can create thousands of fake accounts, and just by flooding the network with junk, I can basically keep other people who are real humans from being heard.
Filippo Menser is professor of informatics and computer science at Indiana University. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you very much, Molly.
Coming up, that data is shared with researchers who obviously are paying you, making money off your digital footprint. But first, let's do the numbers. It could be worse. The Dow Jones Industrial Average shed 313 points, 110% to close at 26,164. The Nasdaq lost 132 points, that's 1.6% to finish at 7823, and the S&P 500 fell 45 points, 1.5%. to close at 28.93. Companies caught in the tensions between the US and China took a hit. Image processing firm Ambarella dropped 9.4%. One of its Chinese clients, Hikvision, was among 28 Chinese firms blacklisted by the US government today. Several other firms fell on reports that the US may limit Chinese stock holdings in government pension funds. Bond prices rose. The yield on the 10-year T-note fell to 1.53%, and you're listening to Marketplace.
Hey everyone, I'm Rima Khrez, host of This is Uncomfortable, a new podcast from Marketplace that explores the thing we're always in our feelings over, but don't really know how to talk about: money. This is a storytelling podcast that digs into things like how someone can feel like an imposter when they move from one socioeconomic class to another, or why so many people lie about what's in their bank account. We'll even teach you how to ask everyone you know about how much they make. But just to be clear, this is not a personal finance podcast. It is a podcast about life and how money messes with it. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts.
This Marketplace podcast is brought to you by Intercom. There's no room for idle chat in business, so if email is your only moneymaker, make room for something new. Intercom. Intercom is the only business messenger that starts with real-time chat, then keeps growing your business with conversational bots and guided product tours. Take Intercom customer Unity. In just 12 months, they converted 45% more visitors through Intercom's messenger. Make room for a new revenue channel. Go to intercom.com/podcast. That's intercom.com/podcast.
And by Acoustic. As a marketer, you've dealt with your share of mediocre technology. Now there's a better way. Introducing Acoustic, the marketing cloud designed specifically for marketers. Acoustic's AI-powered solutions and open platform approach connect your data so you can create more personal connections with your customers. From marketing automation to mobile analytics, they have the tools you need to unleash marketing brilliance. Visit acoustic.co/marketplace to learn more. That's acoustic.co/marketplace. Acoustic, unleash brilliance.
This is Marketplace. I'm Molly Wood. American teenagers are spending less money. They spend just under $200 a month. That is the least they have spent since 2011. And that is according to a survey of nearly 10,000 US teens by the investment bank Piper Jaffray. Marketplace's Erica Barris reports on what they are and aren't spending their money on and what is a brand to do.
Food and clothes are the two biggest spending categories for teenagers, according to the survey. Food for boys, clothes for girls. And although overall teenage spending is down 4% since the last survey 6 months ago, teens have continued to spend on technology. Mike Olson tracks e-commerce for Piper Jaffray.
Teens are interested in trying to ensure that they're having all the devices that they need to kind of keep up with their ability to consume the content that they want to consume.
Like social media sites, says Jenny Fry-Lu with the Center for Customer Insights at Yale. And they're
really following people more than they are following brands.
Those people, influencers, celebrities, other teens, help them decide what to spend their money on, like footwear and athleisure wear. Teenage girls, their favorite clothing item, leggings. There's one thing teenage girls are spending a lot less on, handbags. Back in 2006, they were spending $197 a year on them. In this latest survey, that's down to $90. Barbara Kahn, a marketing professor at Wharton, says that's to be expected.
Well, if you're wearing casual clothes, you're presenting yourself in that look, but that look doesn't require accessories in the same way. So you don't need a handbag. You don't need some of the fancy accessories which young people used to buy.
Or it could be that since everything's on their phones, maybe they just don't need handbags. I'm Erica Barris for Marketplace.
Free services like Facebook, Google, and Twitter aren't completely free, which again, I hope we all realize by now. You're actually trading your data for access to those sites. And a growing number of people think that you should actually be paid for sharing that information. Now, two startups are working together to figure out how to make that exchange happen. One collects and encrypts your data. Another shares that data with paying companies with your permission. Dana Budson is the co-founder and CEO of Oobd, the second app in the mix. Dana, welcome to the program.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Let's go straight to how Oobd works. What did you come up with as a strategy?
Yeah, so we do allow individuals to aggregate their own data across different applications and accounts like Fitbit, Spotify, credit cards, and then we give these people a vehicle to basically share anonymized insights from that data with paying companies and researchers and nonprofits, all while protecting their privacy and identity. Once you've linked your accounts, you're able to click in. It'll tell you we're looking at finance and we're looking at coffee trends. So we want to analyze Starbucks or Pete's coffee spending, whatever it may be. And then you swipe to consent and that data is shared with researchers who obviously are paying you.
How then do you protect that data? Obviously, you're talking about a pretty big treasure trove here.
Right. So our partner DigiMe, they don't see, touch, or hold the data. They give you the only key to access this and then allow you to share that data with apps like ours when you choose. It's actually a two-app system, which is very non-traditional. So we're minimizing any of the data that leaves your device. So neither us at Oobd or any of our partners know who you are, and we ensure that no profiles are being built on people.
And then just on the purely mercenary side of things, how much do you expect that a consumer could make participating with Oobd?
I think for some people it will be hundreds. I think for many people it will be thousands. And then I think there will be other communities of people. Maybe it's in the future of medical data or whatever it is, some special things about you that make you unique, that it will be that, thousands upon thousands of dollars, maybe 5,000 to 10,000.
Let's be explicit about why would some people make more? Why is some data, more valuable than others?
Yeah, a lot of people think when I say that rich people are going to get richer, and that's the concern, right? That they're like, oh, well, the CEOs are going to be the ones that people want to reach out to. I don't actually think that's true because in emerging countries around the world, in places where there's a lack of data, there's a lot of spend happening to find out how to boost communities up. And instead, they could just be putting that money into people's pockets because they know best, right? Mm-hmm. So I do think, of course, there will be the CEOs who someone might pay for an hour of their time and spend a lot of money. But I also think there's this opportunity for low income individuals that are unique.
And then how does UBD make money?
Yeah, so we take 20% of what companies are paying and 80% goes straight back to the individual. So pretty easy transaction fee there.
One just kind of last philosophical question is that sometimes when you talk about the idea of paying people for their data, you will have privacy experts who say, okay, but you're still buying into a flawed system. Like you're still buying into a system that relies on people's data. And wouldn't it be better if we just didn't do that? And I wonder, like, is this still just sort of allowing people to participate in a system that's gonna just want more of their information forever?
You know, it's interesting. For one, there's different nonprofits and other, local governments that we're opening up access to and helping them. But also part of privacy, which people somehow seem to forget, is about choice. And you should have ownership over your data and you should be able to choose for yourself. But at the end of the day, one, this is a step in absolute better direction than the data economy we have today. And part two, giving people choice, I think, is always the better path.
Dana Budson, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
This final note on the way out is about the NBA's troubles with China. Beijing is canceling preseason games, and Chinese companies are pulling NBA gear and endorsements after the general manager of the Houston Rockets tweeted support for pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. Today, Sports Illustrated suggested the NBA should stop doing business with China completely, but the NBA really wants those 500 million basketball fans in China, and lots of NBA players are making big bucks selling sneakers there. HoopsHype.com listed all the players with big sneaker deals with Chinese companies like Li Ning, Anta, and Peak. Golden State Warriors star Klay Thompson's deal to become the, quote, Michael Jordan of Anta is worth some $80 million. And that is that for now. Today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average had 313 points, about 1.1%. The NASDAQ lost 132 points, 1.6%. The S&P 500 down 45 points. That is 1.5%. Our digital and on-demand team includes Janet Wynn, Olga Osman, Brian Ronahan, and Tony Wagner. Sarah Muti is the Executive Director of Digital. Satara Nieves is our Executive Director of On-Demand. And I'm Molly Wood. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. This is APM.
No cooperation, no concessions, full on combat. That sums up the state of play between the White House and Democrats. In the latest twist, former Vice President Joe Biden called today, for the first time, for President Trump to be impeached. That follows a remarkable 8-page letter from White House counsel Pat Cipollone to Democrats on Capitol Hill. The letter, released last night, declares the impeachment inquiry baseless and unconstitutional and says the president will not take part in it. Well, we wanted to do a close read of the letter and how it raises the stakes in this fight. So we have called on Jack Quinn, who served as White House counsel to President Clinton. Jack Quinn, welcome.
Thank you so much. Pleased to be with you.
Glad to have you with us. I'll start with a very basic question. When you read this letter, what leapt out at you?
To be honest, and I've said this before, I was surprised that Pat Cipollone put his name on it. It's not well lawyered. It's not well reasoned. It speaks in, I think, almost complete ignorance of the constitutional provisions governing the relationship between the executive branch and the legislative branch, and most importantly, the impeachment process.
When you say not well lawyered, explain what you mean.
I mean, the first thing that probably deserves that description is this whole section of the letter that talks about the fact that the president hasn't been afforded due process rights under the Constitution. Yes, that makes the process here entirely unconstitutional. So due process rights are an important part of our Constitution, and they apply to any one of us who's in the middle of a criminal proceeding, for example. But this is different. We're not in a grand jury. The president's not about to be indicted, at least not anytime soon. The process that is underway is the very early steps, what the House has chosen to call an inquiry into whether or not there should be a more formal move to impeach the president.
Although, I mean, if Pat Cipollone were here, he would argue, hey, President Trump is an American. He is entitled to the same rights as any American citizen. I'm reading from page 1. Therefore, he enjoys the basic rights guaranteed to all Americans, which would include due process under the Constitution.
Well, the Constitution doesn't say that either, okay? What the Constitution says specifically with respect to impeachment, it says that the House of Representatives, and I'm shortening the sentence, the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment, period. There's a period at the end of that. And there's no sentence following.
They don't tell the House how to do it.
Exactly. They have the sole power.
Although, if I may jump in, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me this letter is arguing something that's almost more basic. It's arguing every American is afforded certain basic rights, including the right to defend themselves, and that the president, in this impeachment inquiry, is being denied that right. Is that legally persuasive to you in any way?
No, because I mean, sure, I agree with the proposition that every American is in one way or another guaranteed the right to defend themselves. And we have extensive case law and provisions, a number of provisions in the Constitution that afford every American that right. But they do so in the context of being accused, for example, of crimes. In the case of impeachment, if the framers had wanted to extend those particular rights and the case law that has been developed for the criminal process into the impeachment process, they could easily have done that. And so Pat made this up, or somebody on his staff made this up, literally out of whole cloth. There's no constitutional basis for it. Frankly, it boggles the mind, as I say, that he would have put his name on this argument. It is about as thin as it can get.
Let me ask you this. Do you know Pat Cipollone?
We've met.
I assume he is also very familiar with the Constitution, having gotten as far as he has in his legal career.
Look, he's doing what his client wants him to do.
Well, that prompts my next question, which is, when you are White House counsel, who's the client? Is the job to serve the presidency or the president?
The former. Your job is to serve the office of the institutional office of the president, not the individual serving as president.
I imagine, though, it's sometimes difficult to separate the two, to draw a line between the Oval Office and the person who's sitting in it.
Yes, and if you come to a fundamental disagreement with the person occupying the office of president, then what you really need to do is resign from your job.
Jack Quinn, thank you very much.
Thank you.
He served as White House counsel to President Clinton from 1995 to 97, and he's a CNN legal analyst.
To northern Syria now, where a Turkish offensive against the Kurds has begun. This comes after President Trump announced earlier in the week that he was withdrawing American troops from the area, which allowed Turkey to proceed. The decision was widely criticized by lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, since Kurdish forces have been a crucial U.S. ally in the fight against ISIS. David Ignatius of the Washington Post is with us to help sort through it all. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I understand you're in touch with Kurdish military leadership in Syria. What have you heard today?
So what I've heard today is that the attack that was feared has begun. The Kurds are already moving people to try to defend their positions against the Turkish attackers. And that raises the problem that worries me most, which is that the ISIS prisoners who are being held, or about 11,000 of them, I'm told, could begin to escape, posing a whole new security problem for the U.S. and all of its allies.
I want to talk about the implications of that in a bit. But first, I want to walk through some of the various players in this conflict and their objectives.
First, Turkey. What do they hope to gain from this move?
Turkey has said for many months now that it wants a security corridor in northern Syria. It has a deep animosity toward the Syrian Kurdish group known as the YPG, which it says is part of the PKK, forgive all the initials, but these are Kurdish nationalist groups, and the Turks claim that they're terrorists, that they've attacked and killed Turks, so they want this security corridor. The problem is that the Turks, in trying to take this zone, risk destabilizing an area where security was, one, at great cost by the Syrian Kurdish militia known as the Syrian Democratic Forces, aided by U.S. Special Forces. So there's fear that this area will just descend into chaos quickly as the Turkish troops come in.
I want to talk now about the Syrian government. Bashar al-Assad is still trying to take back portions of the country with help from Russia. How would this Turkish offensive change the calculus for him?
So it changes the calculus in this way. If you're the Syrian Kurdish commander and you feel that the U.S. is essentially abandoning you, where do you turn for help against your mortal enemies, the Turks? And increasingly, I've been told by the Syrian Kurdish commander, they think that they have to turn to Damascus, they have to turn to the regime. Meanwhile, Assad's key ally, Russia, is said to be moving with Syrian army troops north towards these Kurdish areas, seeking to capitalize on what they think is a vacuum caused by the instability in the U.S. withdrawal.
So these Kurds would have to deal with the threat from Turkey, and then on the other side of things, the threat from the Syrian government trying to reclaim this area.
So this is essentially the Kurdish condition, surrounded by enemies. It's the case in Syria. It's the case in northern Iraq. It's the case in Iran. This is a people who just live in inconvenient countries. So yes, as in the past, the Kurds are surrounded. They feel they have enemies on all sides. They thought the U.S. was a reliable friend, and they now are beginning to doubt that.
I want to come back to something you mentioned earlier, the thousands of ISIS prisoners that the Kurds had been guarding. There's concerns about whether they can continue to do that while also fighting off the Turkish military. You have the president saying today in a statement that, quote, Turkey is now responsible for ensuring all ISIS fighters being held captive remain in prison. Does that seem likely?
So at first, as to Turkey's ability to control these prisons, that's viewed by U.S. Military officials as highly unlikely. It was the Turks who allowed ISIS fighters to come into Syria in the first place. There are long-standing concerns that the Turks have been friendly with jihadist elements who've been part of this fight. So they're not trusted as guardians of these prisons. The second point, I think, is that the breakout from the prisons has already begun. There was a breakout in April in a prison holding some British ISIS members. Finally, there are roughly 70,000 people in a UN-controlled refugee camp, maybe 25% of whom are relatives, wives, children of ISIS fighters, ISIS prisoners. Those people have been rebelling in recent weeks. There have been explosions at this prison camp, or refugee camp called Al-Hol. The fear is that some of the escaping ISIS prisoners might try to rejoin their families. Then thousands of people on the move in northeast Syria, no clear security force that can keep control.
David Ignatius is a columnist for the Washington Post and a senior fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Now to the small town in Maryland hit by 2 flash floods in 2 years. This is what it sounded like when residents called 911.
Oh my God. Ma'am, what's going on? We are at Bean Hall in Old El Cafe on Strikers Road. The water is above the doors.
Currently underwater, and I have about 15 to 30 people in here, so we are trapped inside.
3 people died in those floods, and when the water receded, it was clear the community couldn't survive another deluge. So they considered a drastic solution: tearing down part of Main Street to save the rest. Nearly destroyed the town in a different way. NPR's Rebecca Hersher has more.
The goal was to keep people safe during the next flash flood because it would happen again, and engineers said that tearing down buildings would help by making room for the water. But the idea that the people of Ellicott City, Maryland would allow buildings to be demolished on their beloved historic Main Street was too much for some to bear. And for others, not tearing down those same buildings was unconscionable. And sometimes those people were neighbors.
Hey, Mary Sue, what's up? Not much.
Gail Killen's house on Main Street is from the early 1800s.
When you walk through Ellicott City and when you discover what's inside of those buildings, you see where slaves were hidden on their path to freedom. You see a lot of things that connect you to our greater community.
Gail is aware that the street is prone to flooding. Her house has personally flooded multiple times.
Family and very dear friends will say, "What are you doing here? Why are you still here?" You know, especially if you know what's coming. Why are you here? What's wrong with you?
What do you tell them?
You know, I tell them this place is worth sticking around and working for.
But after the second deadly flash flood, some of her neighbors were ready to leave. Beth Woodruff lived across the street from Gail. She and her son watched the second flood tear through the neighborhood. And the more she learned about what had caused the floods, the more worried she got.
Like, the science is here. This can happen any year. It could happen multiple times in a year. And these people are in real danger.
So when the county said it wanted to buy her house to make room for the water, Beth agreed to move.
I'm sad. I'm really sad. But I genuinely think that by taking my house down, the people who are upstream from me are going to be safer. You know, that's kind of the emotional reaction, right? And then the logical reaction is, all right, well, my son will need less therapy if we're not living on top of this river all the time.
But Beth's decision caused a rift with Gail. Gail, who would never move. Since the 2016 flood, Beth and Gail had been friendly in the particularly close way that happens when you go through something traumatic with your neighbor. But after Beth agreed to move, Gail posted a map of the neighborhood on her own window that she felt proved demolition was unnecessary and labeled houses slated for demolition, including Beth's.
And I think the implication was that I'm somehow a sellout.
Gail says she wasn't attacking Beth. She was just arguing for a different plan.
They began to form this idea that I was attacking her directly because she's on the list of demolition.
To Beth, it felt personal. At one point, Gail posted Beth's address in a Facebook group.
The way I see it, friends don't do that sort of thing to one another. Friends don't stab each other in the back or in the face. If you pretend that human lives are worth less than historic buildings, you're a despicable person. And I don't have any bones about saying that. You're absolutely despicable.
Versions of this happened all up and down Main Street. Front porch conversations went from mundane to conspiratorial. Everything was in upheaval. The social fabric of the place was fraying at the edges. And at its heart, it was about much more than the demolition plan.
Rebuilding decisions are not rational. And I don't think we should pretend they're rational.
Ben Zaitchik is a hydrologist at Johns Hopkins University. He's the kind of guy you might call if you wanted a really rational answer to a question about water. But he's seen a lot of towns deal with catastrophic flooding, and he says there are limits to what hydrologists can offer. He almost sounds like a therapist talking about it. He says, think of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina.
The question of what to do about New Orleans is not a rational engineering conversation. It's a conversation about what we want to be as a society, what a place means to us as a community, locally, and as a country. And so you need to come up with an answer that satisfies the engineering specs and also the human needs.
And the way to do that is for officials to make room for people to make suggestions, to not feel rushed or condescended to. Otherwise, distrust will flourish, and your town could die a social death even before the next storm wipes it out. It all takes time, and time passing helps the fear fade, the grief at what was lost subside. In the year after the second flood, Ellicott City residents pressured the county government to do just that, and the government responded.
Instead of one plan, they presented the townspeople with 5 options that could protect the town from floods, all of which involved demolishing some buildings.
So I know that there is a lot of controversy and not everybody agrees.
Hundreds of residents showed up at public events to ask questions.
So my question is about safety.
To make suggestions.
Have you all studied the economic impact to the existing businesses on Main Street?
To be heard. In May, they announced their decision. Over the next 5 years or so, the county says it will build a tunnel, buy about a dozen homes and businesses, and demolish at least 4. It will cost more than $100 million. In June, trucks and cranes arrived on Main Street and started pulling debris out of the buildings. Gail is still fighting against the plan, and Gail and Beth's friendship appears to be over. But in general, the town's social fabric is slowly repairing, and a lot of people are okay with the construction plan. Sally? Hey! Even people who are also grieving the loss of what the town used to be before the floods. People like Sally Tennant. On a muggy day in August, I found her inside the shell of her old store, which was destroyed by water twice. She's sitting in a folding chair next to a massive hole in the floor. You can see the river running by beneath.
When I go into town now, I mean, it's hard to get over. Just like sometimes just shake my head. Did this really happen here?
Sally is a strong person. You can see it in the way she's here, where she almost died, in the way she showed up to every public meeting for years to talk about what should be done and advocate for business owners who are losing their buildings. She's also incredibly thoughtful for someone who's just lost everything.
My opinion, I'm glad they're not tearing down 10 buildings at this point from a visual standpoint. However, the one thing that they can control is the man-made factors. So sometimes I feel a sense of optimism like they're going to fix it. And then the pessimistic side of me says, can they fix it? The odds of it flooding again are very, very high.
And that is what it looks like for Main Street to adapt to climate change. People may not be entirely happy with the plan, and a lot of people are still scared when it rains, but they're also cautiously, maybe even irrationally optimistic, because their town has agreed to do something, and that means there's hope. Rebecca Hersher, NPR News, Ellicott City, Maryland.
And this story was produced by Ryan Kelman. Former Vice President Joe Biden is now explicitly saying President Trump should be impeached.
We all laughed when he said he could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot someone and get away with it. It's no joke. He's shooting holes in the Constitution, and we cannot let him get away with it.
Biden ramped up his message against Trump at a campaign event he held today in Rochester, New Hampshire. NPR's Danielle Kurtzleben is on the trail with Biden. She joins us now from Manchester. Danielle, what has changed? Why is Joe Biden now saying this about the president?
Right. So this is the most direct that Joe Biden has been about calling for impeachment of President Trump. In the past, he had been conditional at one point, saying that that if Trump didn't cooperate with Congress, they would leave him no choice. He had just been saying that he supported the inquiry. Now, while other candidates had been more direct. Now, in recent days, as I'm sure you know, more has added up. Trump called on China to investigate Biden. Now the White House is refusing to cooperate with the investigation by House Democrats. And former Vice President Biden really struck a very somber tone today, really trying to stress the gravity of what he sees as a threat to democracy. Here's what he said.
With his words and his actions, President Trump has indicted himself by obstructing justice, refusing to comply with the congressional inquiry. He's already convicted himself. In full view of the world and the American people, Donald Trump has violated his oath of office, betrayed this nation, and committed impeachable acts.
Now, we should add that right after this speech, Trump responded immediately with a tweet. It said, "So pathetic to see sleepy Joe Biden, who with his son Hunter, and to the detriment of the American taxpayer, has ripped off at least 2 countries for millions of dollars, calling for my impeachment." and I did nothing wrong. Joe's failing campaign gave him no other choice.
And we should make it clear that this is a completely false statement from the president. There's no evidence he's presented to this point. And to that point, did Biden address the allegations Trump is making against him and his son?
Yes, so Joe Biden said pretty much what you just said. He said these are lies. He didn't get into specifics. He just said that the president was saying falsehoods. But what's interesting is that Joe Biden also turned this around and folded it into an existing argument he is making. Joe Biden has been saying for a long time on the campaign trail that Donald Trump is scared of him and that that's why Donald Trump attacks him. So Biden made this about electability. He said, Donald Trump is lying about me and is attacking me because he's afraid to face me.
You've also been talking to voters. What are you hearing from them about all this?
You know, as far as impeachment, the voters here, they care about it. A lot of these voters want to see Trump impeached, but it doesn't really weigh on how they feel about the campaign from what I gather. Now, as far as Hunter Biden's business dealings overseas, again, there are a lot of voters here who really didn't bring it up, and when I asked them about it, didn't seem to care. I will say that the most serious misgivings about Hunter Biden's business dealings that I heard were from a very solid Biden supporter. Her name is Pam Dupay, and she said, Hunter Biden doing business overseas while his father was responsible for U.S. policies in countries like Ukraine. She said it's bad judgment, but it's not really a big deal.
It annoys me that his son was even had anything to do with that. I mean, I think that was a stupid move, but I don't think of anything illegal or anything nefarious, or I just think kind of a lack of judgment maybe.
But again, you hear from a lot of these voters, no matter what, they think Trump is worse than, that Trump is just the worst choice, no matter whom Democrats nominate.
That's NPR's Daniel Kurtzleben. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Today, Turkey launched its long-expected offensive on Kurdish-controlled areas in northern Syria. The attack comes just 3 days after President Trump ordered U.S. troops out of the border region. The Kurds are U.S. allies. They have been protecting religious minorities in Syria. NPR's Tom Gelton says the president's order has angered U.S. Christian leaders.
Organizations following the fighting in Syria over the past 8 years have been especially concerned about attacks on Christians, Yazidis, and other religious minorities largely carried out by ISIS. Those minorities have found refuge in areas of Syria controlled by Kurdish forces, but that's precisely the part of Syria now targeted by Turkey.
We're getting reports that some of these villages are being shelled or being bombed, and there's a lot of concern among these Christians in particular that we're hearing from.
Tony Perkins is an evangelical Christian leader now chairing the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. He was appointed by President Trump, but Perkins is among those U.S. Christians worried about the effect in Syria of Trump's pullback of U.S. troops.
We could see another move of genocide in that region.
The concern is that the Kurdish forces who've been protecting Christians and other minorities may now be pushed aside. Thousands of ISIS prisoners now under Kurdish control could be left unguarded. President Trump has enjoyed almost unlimited support from evangelical Christian leaders, in part because his administration has highlighted the persecution of Christians around the world. But by giving an apparent green light to this Turkish invasion, Trump's reputation has been tainted. Here's evangelical Pat Robertson speaking Monday on his Christian Broadcasting Network.
I want to say this with great solemnity. The President of the United States is in danger of losing the mandate of heaven if he permits this to happen.
That criticism is echoing across the U.S. Christian world. Russell Moore, who heads the policy arm of the Southern Baptist Convention, said today the U.S. failure to push back against the Turkish attacks is a disgrace. Our brothers and sisters in Christ, Moore tweeted, are among those targeted for slaughter. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham today called for a day of prayer for the Kurds now up against Turkish forces. In his broadcast today, Pat Robertson seconded Graham's call to stand with the Kurds.
They're our allies and our friends, and we absolutely cannot abandon them.
Still more criticism today from Franklin Graham, until now one of President Trump's most loyal supporters in evangelical circles. In a tweet, Graham said, "Would you pray with me that President Trump will reconsider? Thousands of lives hang in the balance. Faced with such criticism, President Trump today defended his move. In a statement, he said, "The United States has made it clear to Turkey that this operation is a bad idea. Turkey," he said, "has committed to protecting civilians, protecting religious minorities, including Christians, and we will hold them to this commitment," he said. But at the U.S. Commission on Religious Freedom, Tony Perkins, long a Trump ally, isn't all that hopeful that Turkey will heed the president's word.
I do not have a high level of confidence. In fact, I have no confidence that Turkey will preserve true religious freedom or protect those religious minorities.
All this pushback from evangelical leaders over Trump's Syria move doesn't necessarily mean he will lose evangelical support come election time. Ralph Reed, founder of the Faith and Freedom Coalition, is quoted in a new book today saying that American evangelicals have a moral obligation to back President Trump enthusiastically. Tom Gelton, NPR News, Washington.
Move over, Sherlock Holmes. Britain has a new super sleuth, and the internet is calling her Wagatha Christie. Let me explain. A drama unlike any other is unfolding across the pond, and to walk us through it, we are joined by Elizabeth Payton. She covers fashion and luxury from London for the New York Times. Elizabeth Payton, welcome.
Hello.
Hi. I don't even know where to begin this story. It is so crazy. I guess I'll know Britons who do seem to love a really deliciously gossipy, trashy tabloid tell-all. Maybe they were overdue for a good scandal.
I have to say, we've really, really needed it. Britain is exhausted by Brexit and the constant doom and gloom. So it's no surprise that Wagatha Christie, as you mentioned in the introduction, has broken the internet today. And the reason why it's called Wagatha Christie is that WAG or WAGs is an acronym commonly used here to refer to the wives and girlfriends of high-profile athletes. And two of the women involved in today's feud are two of the most high-profile WAGs in the country.
Okay. The wives or girlfriends in question here are Colleen Rooney and Rebecca Vardy. Who are those two women?
So Colleen first came on the scene in 2006 as the young, fresh-faced teenage sweetheart of Wayne Rooney, who went on to become the England soccer team captain. And Colleen, really has built up a powerful brand for herself. She's an idol for many young women here in Britain. Whereas Rebecca Vardy came on the scene more recently. She met her husband Jamie, who plays for Leicester City, when she was a nightclub promoter. They got married in 2016, and it's now on every front page and home screen here since Miss Rooney's allegations surfaced about her today.
All right, let's cut to these allegations then. The story at the core is a conflict between these two women, and this started with Colleen Rooney's Instagram account. I'll just lay a little bit of the backdrop and then let you pick up the story. Colleen Rooney noticed that things that she posted on her closed private Instagram account kept turning up in the tabloid press, including in the Sun newspaper in Britain. And she decided to launch a sting operation to figure out how this was happening.
So what she did is she started publishing stories on her personal Instagram account, but reducing the people that could view it to just one person, the person that she thought leaking these stories to the Sun. And that person, as she announced sensationally this morning, was Rebecca Vardy, who she accused of releasing a number of stories about whether it was sort of more menial things like she had had flooding in her basement, to this false story that she'd gone to Mexico for gender selection treatment. And once she had 3 clear screenshots that it was only Rebecca Vardy who had seen these stories, she let the cat out of the bag.
What has Rebecca Vardy said? Has she fessed up, or what's her reaction been?
Well, it's a really interesting response. I mean, she didn't say that she didn't do it. She claimed that someone had been hacking her Instagram account, but she was very upset that she was pregnant and she was seeking legal advice.
Give me a little bit of a sense of how big a story this is in Britain today.
It's the story that everybody needs right now, and it appears that people just can't or won't think of anything else. You've got some of the most serious political journalists in the country joking that maybe we could get Colleen Rooney into number 10, where the Prime Minister lives, in order to work out who's leaking the Brexit stories that are dominating the front page headlines. But honestly, it's just been the respite we've all been hoping for. It's been pouring with rain and sort of doom and gloom in the headlines, and sometimes you just need a little bit of cheer. That's the tea from here.
That is Elizabeth Payton, European style reporter for the New York Times based in London. Elizabeth Payton, thank you.
Thank you.
Children have been called the hidden casualties of the opioid crisis. They experience abuse and neglect. Many take on parental roles, and a growing number are in foster care. But a national mentoring program is trying to help. Kavitha Cardosa visited one such program in Dayton, Ohio. We should note that this story includes harrowing details about addiction, abuse, and neglect.
It's 8-year-old C's first time at Camp Mariposa. She's nervous. She's still learning the camp song, I didn't cause it, I can't control it, I can't cure it. C sits in a circle with other campers, all between 8 and 12. C is her first initial. We're not naming her or the other children in the story to protect their privacy. Her curly hair bobbing, C looks around. She desperately wants a new best friend.
I had this one best friend, and I told her all my secrets. So one day she just snapped on me and went telling someone, and then that someone came to me and told me that I'm going to end up just like my parents.
C's parents had been using drugs since she was born. When she was 5, her grandmother got a phone call saying terrible things were going on in the family. So she picked up C, who's lived with her ever since. C has no contact with her mother. Her father is locked up. Wendy Berkshire, the camp director, says for children like C, secrets and shame are a huge burden.
Don't talk, don't share, don't feel. And we teach the kids here at camp, when we keep our feelings inside and we don't have an opportunity to share them in a safe place and with a safe person, it becomes a part of the cycle of addiction.
Here, those secrets come spilling out. One camper talks about coming home after a play date and being taken away to foster care.
I just didn't want it to happen again because it's happened too many times. So when it happened again, I had a mental breakdown and I got anxiety and got depression.
Another wants to forget what she's seen.
My mom did drugs and she was pregnant with my brother, and it made me upset because she almost made my brother die.
One boy shares his mom has relapsed.
She says it's like a grip it has upon you. She explained it to me and my brother. Like, if you really wanted to have a cupcake every single day and constantly, and if you didn't have it, you'd feel really sick.
The nonprofit Illuna runs these camps in 13 states, many in areas hardest hit by the opioid crisis. All these children have experienced trauma. And like C, many are conflicted about their parents' behavior. Her mother lives in a different state and has lost custody of all 4 of her children.
When my sister and my brother were kids, my mom would actually beat them. Like, a child abused them. My brother and sister were just screaming and crying. Because actually my mom held my sister's throat and choked her up to where her feet were off the ground. How did that make you feel? It made me feel like mad at my mom. I still don't forgive her, but I still love her.
These kids have experienced needles in their living room and having to call 911 to revive their parents.
As a camp mentor here, Derek Fink hears painful stories.
Kids living in garages, peeing in buckets in the corner. Kids sticking up for their parents because they want them to do right. Kids watching their dads OD and die to raise their own brothers and sisters because there's no parent in their life.
Sharing feelings and caring adults. That's how this camp tries to boost protective influences in these kids' lives, because they're at higher risk for using drugs themselves and for entering the juvenile justice system.
We can't fix their lives, but we can walk alongside that.
Walking alongside means these camps are not a one-off event. These 25 campers get together every month, and mentors also meet them on weekends. In many ways, these adults are the stable, consistent figures in their lives. One little girl says at camp, she knows she belongs.
Like, this is my home, and my other home at home is like a backup.
There's also a 4-month program for family members still in the children's lives, and lots of free activities funded through government and private money. Songs and stress balls, deep breathing, and drawing. They're taught calming techniques and coping skills to make better choices. Wendy Berkshire wants them to realize they do have power.
to know that they have the ability, they can't control what's going on in their life or their family, but they have all the power to control themselves and their emotions.
Mindfulness jars are a huge hit.
Purple and yellow. I love that.
Children mix a few drops of food coloring into their jars, which are filled with a mixture of water and glue. Then they add glitter.
Gently put the glitter in. We have blue, purple, pink, and white.
Next one.
Yeah, half a spoon.
I want white and blue.
The jar has a pretty simple idea behind it. When you shake it, your thoughts and feelings are like the glitter, agitated and all over the place.
When you get the glitter in, you want to shake it.
Like this.
Stop shaking, the glitter settles down, and so can you. The kids stare at their jars.
So then you can watch it go calm, and it helps me breathe.
These kids can be giggly and goofy here. They pour too much syrup on their pancakes, yell about spotting a spider, and are looking forward to the big camp party tonight, complete with a DJ and s'mores. But before that, they need to tackle some tough stuff. The children have written letters to addiction, and they're getting ready to read them out loud.
This is a circle of safety. We're just sharing and we're listening.
The lights are dim. Even C is uncharacteristically somber. She sits close to her 3 new best friends as she reads.
Dear Addiction, why do adults like you? When I'm older, I will be against you. You make me not like my mom and dad, and it's sad. You make my dad go to prison. I hate you.
After a moment, another child speaks up.
Dear Addiction, you are my worst enemy. You took my dad from me, my stepdad, my aunt, and vowed to be my uncle. So I just have to ask you a question. Could you please just go to hell? Signed, a very sad kid.
One little girl struggles to get through hers.
I hate you so bad. I wish you wasn't real. You hurt kids so bad. I hate you. Go to hell. This is a flip for my mom. You miss your mommy?
Everyone cries.
You don't have to keep it inside anymore. And the most important thing to Miss Wendy is that you know that you're not alone. Absolutely most important thing to me is that you're seen and you're known and you're heard.
The children line up near a fire pit to throw their letters in. Throw it up. Nice. I'm so proud of you. Love you. I love you too, sweetheart. You are something. It was really hard stuff, wasn't it? You guys my mom. You missed your mom. I know you do, sweetheart. And I'm sorry that mommy's not here. I'm sorry. For NPR News, I'm Kavita Cardoza in Dayton, Ohio.
U.S. officials are closely watching the Turkish offensive into northern Syria. They're worried that the Kurds, who are a U.S. ally, are under attack. After a day of airstrikes, Turkey says its troops have crossed the border. And the offensive comes after President Trump, in a call with the Turkish president, agreed to relocate the small number of U.S. forces who were in the path. But he had this response today when asked if Turkey might wipe out the Kurds.
I will wipe out his economy if that happens.
Now we're going to get some sense of how this offensive is taking shape. U.S. officials have been speaking with NPR's Pentagon correspondent Tom Bowman. He joins us now. And Tom, I'd like to start off with the basics. You have the Turkish forces amassed along the border with Syria, striking areas controlled by Kurdish militias. What's behind this? Why are they doing this, and how intense has it gotten?
Well, this argument has gone on for years now between the U.S. and Turkey. Now, Turkey sees these Kurdish fighters in Syria as allied with Kurdish militants inside Turkey who are fighting the Turkish government. But these Kurdish fighters are also working with the U.S. to go after ISIS. They've been very strong fighters, very staunch fighters. They've lost thousands of Kurdish fighters over the past number of years. And again, this is what's led to it. This argument has gone on for a number of years now. So Turkey's going in to basically push these Kurdish fighters away from the border area. Now, Turkey just announced that they've started their ground operation into Syria, and this comes after a number of Syrian towns and villages have come under Turkish airstrikes, artillery barrages, And there are already some civilians who have been killed in these attacks and dozens wounded. Also, some of these strikes are near the town of Kobani, and U.S. troops are stationed nearby, but I'm told not too close to any of these strikes.
There's been a lot of opposition to this move by the president. I want to play some tape of Republican Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina. He was speaking on Fox and Friends today.
And I will say this to the president. It would be hard to protect America without allies over there. And the Kurds have been good allies. And when Turkey goes into Syria, they're not going in to fight ISIS. They're going in to kill the Kurds.
Tom, President Trump has also issued a statement from the White House. What was his message to Turkey?
Right, he did put out a statement tonight. He said that the United States, quote, does not endorse this attack, end of quote. He called the operation by Turkey a bad idea. He said Turkey, interestingly, has committed to protecting civilians and ensuring no humanitarian crisis takes place, and also ensuring all ISIS fighters being held captive remain in prison. Now, here's a problem with all of that. Civilians are leaving now in large numbers from these towns that have come under Turkish attack, so there's a potential crisis right there. Again, some civilians have been killed, dozens wounded by these Turkish attacks, so that's not ensuring their safety. And the military officers I talked with doubt Turkey will either go after ISIS or hold them as prisoners, and the Kurds may abandon these prisoners if this ground operation by Turkey gets more and more intense. They'll just move away from the prisons and leave these folks unguarded, these ISIS fighters.
What are some of the other concerns from defense officials?
Well, one of the big concerns is a bloody battle between Turkey, a NATO ally, and the Kurds, a U.S. ally against ISIS. It could just get worse and worse. One official I spoke with today said he thinks it's going to get a lot worse. Also, a possible ISIS resurgence if the Kurds are moving toward fighting Turkey and not going after ISIS. Already, we've seen some ISIS suicide bombings taking advantage of this situation. And also, people say it could embolden Russia and Iranian forces who are supporting the Syrian government. They could take over territory held by the Kurds, including oil fields. So there are a number of concerns by U.S. officials.
That's NPR's Pentagon correspondent Tom Bowman. Thanks for your reporting.
You're welcome, Audie.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Viget. Viget is a digital product agency that partners with businesses to propel growth, reduce costs, and diversify revenue through innovation. Learn how Viget can help your business at viget.com/NPR.
Another story now. Developers around the country are building entire subdivisions of new single-family homes. These houses are not for sale. You can't buy them. That is because they are for rent. Home builders are discovering there are a lot of people right now who could afford to buy a house, but they would rather not. NPR's Chris Arnold reports.
A different sort of American dream is under construction outside of Denver. 136 homes are being framed and nailed down together, but there won't be any realtors staging open houses here. Instead of home ownership, this development is all about renting.
We got started in around 2010 after the housing crash. People were losing their homes.
Josh Hartman is the CEO of Next Metro Communities, the company building these homes. And he says that the business idea was that all those families losing homes to foreclosure, they wouldn't want to go back to renting apartments. They'd want to rent single family houses until they could get back on their feet financially. But that is not who kept walking into the sales office to rent the houses.
What we were shocked to find out was it was people that had great credit. They had money for down payments. They had great incomes, but they just didn't want to own a home. They were a lifestyle renter by choice.
And there were a lot of them. So Next Metro kept building homes. It's built 2,800 so far in Colorado, Arizona, and Texas. And they fill up quickly. Other builders are now doing this around the country too. So if many of these people actually could buy a house, why are they deciding to rent one instead?
It's just perfect for me. I wanted the house feel, but not the house payment and not the commitment of a 30-year mortgage.
A few miles away in a finished development, Luann Irwin is showing me around the little cottage-type house that she's renting. Irwin just got divorced, and so she's not sure where she's going to want to live longer term. Her house here is not big, but it does have 10-foot high ceilings and a pretty spacious feeling kitchen and living area. The yard is definitely tiny, and the homes are packed tightly together, but that doesn't bother Irwin.
I've got a gas grill out there. I've got a fire pit, and we sit out there. And at night, my neighbor next door came over the night, and we just sit around, drank wine, and just talk. It felt like home to me. So this was just a real win-win for me.
There's also a nice pool for residents to share, complete with. Okay, so this is my favorite thing so far. Just a nice big hot tub.
Yeah, this is the spot that our residents love to hang out in the evenings or on the weekends with their friends.
Josh Hartman, the CEO, says there are basically 3 types of renters of these houses. People who recently got divorced, like Irwin. Also, aging baby boomers who don't want the headaches of owning a house anymore. And he says there are a lot of younger people, too. 25-year-old Itzel Alarcon just moved here with her husband.
We just got married actually 2 months ago as well. So as soon as we got married, we moved in.
Now, most millennials say that they want to own a house someday, but they're not buying as young as prior generations. For some, student loan debt is a factor. Alarcon says she saw relatives get hurt by the housing crash, and home prices have doubled in this area since then. So she's nervous that they might fall again.
Yes, prices right now are extremely ridiculous high, and so we'll stay here probably for a year or 2, for sure.
And at $1,500 a month, she says the couple's 1-bedroom cottage is cheaper than buying a house in the neighborhood she finds appealing. So for the people that we just met, renting seems to make perfect sense. But if they stay here too long, would they be violating one of the fundamentals of good personal finance? Because owning a home and building equity in it is still the most powerful way that most Americans accumulate wealth.
Owning still makes much more sense.
William Wheaton is a housing economist at MIT. He says these rental homes are fine short term, but he hopes that young people don't wait too long to buy into the housing market.
I mean, if prices continue to rise, like they have in Denver, buying in Denver will be a money tree. But even if you're very cautious and say, no, they're not going to continue to rise a lot. They'll, inch up a few percentage points each year. Over 5 or 10 years, that adds up to a sizable nest egg. And that's what you're giving up by renting.
Back at Next Metro's development, Josh Hartman says he hopes that more young people buy homes too. But until they're ready, he's got 3,000 more single-family rental houses under construction or in development. Over the past year, developers around the country built about 40,000 homes as rentals. And Louette Irwin, for her part, thinks that her little cottage beats an apartment any day.
I don't know if you noticed the patio, but I've got my own little private patio. So I love this. I really do. I mean, you're not going to get a patio like this in an apartment. You're just not.
Chris Arnold, NPR News.
And we have a lot of good pointers on whether to rent or buy a home in NPR's Life Kit podcast. That's at npr.org/lifekit. As Democrats and Congress go back and forth on the impeachment inquiry into President Trump's discussions with foreign leaders, the rhetoric has been intense and at times colorful.
Like yesterday, when on Twitter, President Trump compared the House committees looking into impeachment to a, quote, compromised kangaroo court.
Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz leaned into that metaphor, even took it a step further.
And Chairman Schiff is acting like a malicious Captain Kangaroo.
In case you're too young to recall, Captain Kangaroo was a kids' TV show, started in the 1950s, ran almost 30 years. Not to say that Captain Kangaroo never got political.
What's going on around here? Mr. Moose. What? For president? Surely not president of the United States.
Well, it's a free country. Why can't a moose be president?
But the problem is a kangaroo court doesn't refer to a legal proceeding presided over by a kangaroo.
No, it does not. The phrase, in fact, refers to a court that circumvents the law. It comes, most experts say, from the quick justice imposed on many rowdy Aussies in the California Gold Rush of 1849.
So put that in your pouch in case anyone asks.
Matt Lauer was fired from his job as host of the Today Show nearly 2 years ago after NBC News received a complaint from a colleague that he had committed inappropriate sexual behavior in the workplace. Now learning there may have been more to the story, his colleague has now gone on the record to say he raped her while they were both at the 2014 Sochi Olympics. Lauer denies this. The revelations appear in the forthcoming book by investigative reporter Ronan Farrow. We want to warn listeners, this story obviously involves upsetting details. NPR's David Folkenflik covered the Lauer scandals back in 2017. He's been reporting on this story today, and he joins me now from New York. Hey, David. What more do we know about these accusations?
Sure, they stem from the 2014 Winter Olympics in Sochi, the Russian resort. And they stem from a time where this younger producer, Brooke Nevels, was essentially working for Meredith Vieira, and was co-host for a number of years on the station. She had been joining Vieira for a drink at a hotel bar, and Lauer invited her back to his hotel room to get back some credentials. She said she went back a second time. He had always treated her like a little sister, but this time he asked her if she liked anal sex. She said no, and he proceeded to force himself upon her that way, nonetheless, despite her being intoxicated and her repeatedly saying no. She did say, however, to Ronan Farrow, the author, that she, fearing for her job, consented to still have certain kinds of relationships with him subsequently in a manner she regretted.
I noted that Matt Lauer is denying this. Has he given any fuller account of his version of events?
Yes, he sent out a bristling, indignant, call it 2.5-page response to NPR and other news outlets earlier today. He basically said this was a consensual affair. It was extramarital. He regretted it. It was inappropriate. And yet she had sought out a lot of the contact subsequently. And indeed, he said, as he's been accused by a number of women over the last, call it 2 years, he has said that all of his interactions with women were consensual, and that the accusations that he has faced are basically women failing to uphold their own obligations and responsibility for their involvement in consensual relationships.
David, what is NBC saying? And I guess I'm curious both if they have come out with an official statement and if you've been able to learn just how this is playing in the newsroom there today.
Concerns about Matt Lauer's behavior was an open secret at NBC News, and yet executives say that his behavior, as the formal complaint filed by Neville showed, was appalling and reprehensible. In their words, that was why they fired him in November of 2017. They say the researcher had no previous formal complaints, and that they made 2 other settlements with women subsequent to his firing after they came forward with their complaints. But they're going to have to face a lot of people in that newsroom. I think have a lot of deep questions and reservations about how executives handle one of their top.
I should add some context here, which is that Ronan Farrow, the author, has written this book exposing this claim. He used to work with Matt Lauer at NBC. He was working on the Harvey Weinstein story there, and has said that this new reporting on Matt Lauer stems from all of that time that he worked at NBC. What does it say about NBC that he's breaking these stories from outside the NBC newsroom?
Well, if you credit the arguments that Ronan Farrow makes in this book, and some of which have gotten into the press, it's clear that he's essentially arguing the culture of the place that journalistically was compromised by their fears of their biggest star, their main moneymaker, Matt Lauer of the Today Show, and that his behavior might somehow be exposed. NBC has said it's laughable that they're worried about, tabloid coverage of Lauer, but Ronan Farrow had been working on an expose about Harvey Weinstein, the Hollywood powerhouse producer. At the point he was told that he could not pursue it any further, he hopped over to the New Yorker and got a Pulitzer for his reporting there. In this case, he's arguing that Harvey Weinstein actually effectively pressured key NBC News officials. That's Andy Lack, the chairman of NBC News, Noah Oppenheim, the president of NBC News, Phil Griffin, the president of NBC, these major news executives at NBC, and made it clear to them that past behavior of, say, Matt Lauer could be fair game in ways that they might fear. NBC News chairman Andy Lack vigorously denied Farrow's account of the coverage of the Weinstein story, saying Farrow simply didn't have it and was painting an untrue picture of what happened at NBC. These are questions that have not been fully addressed by the leadership of NBC News, and for that newsroom to function, for them to regain the idea of their integrity, they're going to have to answer that in a way. Things be able to proceed. There are a lot of very skeptical journalists inside NBC as well as outside.
NPR media correspondent Phil Conflict speaking there from New York. Thank you, David.
You bet.
Now to Minneapolis, where President Donald Trump is holding his first campaign rally since the impeachment hearing began. The visit has sparked controversy across the city, from officials who want the campaign to cover extra costs for security to residents in the Democratic stronghold, thousands of whom are planning to protest. Brianna Bierschbach from Minnesota Public Radio has more.
The backlash to Trump's visit started immediately. The city-owned Target Center tried to charge the Trump campaign $530,000 in extra security and other costs to Minneapolis.
The campaign has unpaid rally invoices for extra costs to cities around the country. One of the most vocal opponents has been Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Fry, a Democrat who said he couldn't block Trump from visiting, but he could try to make him pay for it.
It's not extortion to expect that somebody pay their bills, even when they really don't want to pay their bills. It is my job to watch out for the taxpayers of the city of Minneapolis. Honestly, that's something that the president should be doing as well.
But Trump's campaign threatened to sue the city if it blocked the president from rallying without payment. After 24 hours of legal threats and back and forth between the president and the mayor on Twitter, the campaign worked out a deal with the venue where they won't pay anything extra up front. That means the rally is going on as planned, and protesters are getting ready.
No Trump! No KKK! No racist USA!
To counter the thousands of Trump supporters expected to attend the rally, thousands plan to show up outside of the arena in opposition to the president. They're making signs and planning logistics. Hundreds of marshals have been trained to try and keep protesters safe. Giselda Gutierrez works with the Minnesota Immigrant Rights Action Committee, which posted a Dump Trump protest event on Facebook that's already attracted thousands of responses.
Well, when I read it, at first I was just a little shocked. Like, well, he's coming here to Minneapolis. I mean, I felt pretty upset reading that, and I definitely felt like, oh, no, there's no way, we're not going to let him just do that peacefully. I'm not here.
Minneapolis is among the most democratic cities in the country. It sits in the congressional district that elected Democratic Representative Ilhan Omar last fall with 78% of the vote. In 2016, only 18% of voters in the city backed Trump for president. And it's a city with a large immigrant community, including tens of thousands of refugees from Somalia. Jailani Hussein is executive director of the Minnesota chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations. He blames Trump's rhetoric for hate crimes in his community. Several East African-owned businesses in Minneapolis were vandalized last month.
And we believe this will be the case for this week as this president comes to continue to further pin neighbors against one another.
But Trump has strong support outside of the Twin Cities. He came within 1.5 percentage points of beating Hillary Clinton in Minnesota, a state that hasn't picked a Republican for president since Richard Nixon's landslide win in 1972. Trump is already pledging to win Minnesota in 2020. His campaign is using the rally to mobilize and train volunteers. Lisa Schneegans is a Trump supporter from the suburbs and says she's excited he's taking the fight right into Minneapolis.
But I think it's really important for him to go into the inner city because that's really where we have to win hearts and minds. And once that he shows that he's ready to take on the belly of the beast, I think it's going to be a huge thing for the campaign.
Supporters have already started camping out for the rally. For NPR News, I'm Brianna Bierschbach in Minneapolis.
A whistleblower's existence can be a perilous one. The possibility of retaliation at work looms large, particularly so if the subject of your complaint has told his 65 million Twitter followers that you should be publicly exposed and questioned. That is how, this morning, President Trump attacked the whistleblower whose complaint has led to an impeachment inquiry. Here to walk us through how the process is supposed to work is NPR Justice correspondent Ryan Lucas. Hey, Ryan.
Hello there.
So a simple question, if I am a whistleblower, an intelligence community whistleblower, do I have an ironclad guarantee of confidentiality?
And the simple answer to that is no. There is no guarantee of absolute confidentiality. The intelligence community inspector's general's office is by law prohibited from releasing the name or any personally identifiable information without the whistleblower's consent. There is a caveat that it can't be disclosed if it's unavoidable in the course of an investigation. Other laws related to whistleblowers have similar provisions, but experts say there's nothing in those laws preventing people not in the Inspector General's office from disclosing the identity if they learn it. Legal folks say that other laws could come into play, like the Privacy Act, but it gets a bit murky.
Yeah, I'm thinking of some of the scenarios in this particular case. As you know, lawmakers want to talk to this whistleblower directly as part of their inquiry. Could that lead to this person's identity being exposed?
That's a really good question, and it's one that's particularly relevant given the fact that the president himself attacked the whistleblower and said that his or her identity, as you said earlier, should be exposed. Now, it has to be said, Congress in the past has passed laws to try to protect whistleblowers and their identity. Senator Chuck Grassley, a Republican from Iowa, has championed whistleblowers. He recently said that this whistleblower's identity must be protected. The concern is that exposing the whistleblower can have a chilling effect on future whistleblowers.
Right.
there are potential repercussions for a member of Congress who exposes a whistleblower's identity. They can lose their committee assignments or be censured by the House, but there are no criminal repercussions, experts say. And these are very partisan times that we are living in. A member of Congress could, in theory, make the calculation that leaking or exposing the identity of this whistleblower would be worth the risk.
So what kind of precautions are these three committees running the inquiry? What are they thinking about in terms of trying to keep that from happening?
Well, I posed a question like that to Kel McClanahan. He is a national security lawyer. He's represented whistleblowers. And he said that if he were representing this whistleblower, he would definitely try to shield the individual's identity from lawmakers during testimony. Here's what he said he might do.
Do it over the phone. Do it behind the screen. Do it the way you would do a confidential informant in a criminal trial, where you cannot trust, I hate to say it, but you cannot trust all the members of the committee to keep his identity secret.
Now, sources tell me that talks are underway between the whistleblower's legal team and lawmakers to sort out how to get lawmakers the information that they're looking for while protecting the whistleblower's identity. And I'm told that precautionary measures, such as the ones we just heard, are under consideration.
Okay, so to be clear, there's no requirement that if this whistleblower provides testimony, that has to be done in person.
No, not at all. Testimony can be submitted in writing. And in this instance, though, the issue is that lawmakers have made clear that they want to hear directly from him or her.
Okay, so they're figuring out in what format that might take place. Okay, how is this all supposed to end for the whistleblower, Ryan? I mean, if this is when this finally concludes in whatever way it's going to conclude, what is that person's life supposed to look like?
Well, in an ideal world, the whistleblower submits the complaint, gets investigated, and the whistleblower remains anonymous, except to maybe the friends. Lawyers tell me that does sometimes happen. The whistleblower just kind of carries on with his or her job like nothing happened. Often that's not the case, though. As McClanahan told me, whistleblowers in the federal government are generally viewed as an annoyance. In the intelligence community, very insular, secretive by nature, they can be regarded with hostility. And lawyers that I spoke with at agencies do sometimes retaliate against them. They can be reassigned, security clearances revoked. So there can be potential retaliation.
NPR Justice Correspondent Brian Lucas, thank you.
Thank you.
Batteries usually don't get noticed unless they're running low. Today, though, the Nobel Prize in Chemistry honored batteries, specifically lithium-ion batteries. NPR's Nell Greenfield Voice reports those batteries helped usher in a revolution in how people interact with electronic devices.
John Goodenough normally works at the University of Texas at Austin. Today, he was in England. Its Royal Society was presenting him with the Copley Medal, probably the oldest scientific award in the world. That's where the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences reached him to say they were giving him the Nobel Prize in Chemistry. I asked Goodenough if he remembered the first time he ever had a cell phone or other device with a lithium-ion battery in it.
No, I don't remember when, because I've never carried one of those things in my pocket.
That coding lab is famous among his fellow lithium-ion battery researchers.
I mean, you hear his laugh and you will not forget it.
Brett Lux is a chemist at the University of Rhode Island. Goodenough is the oldest scientist ever to get a Nobel at the age of 97. Lux says he is still going strong.
I was at a lithium battery meeting with John Goodenough probably 2 or 3 years ago in Berkeley. And he asked more questions than anybody else in the room, and every single question that he asked was an excellent question.
Goodenough shares the Nobel Prize with Stan Whittingham of Binghamton University, State University of New York, and Akira Yoshino of Japan. All three made advances that let lithium ions flow back and forth in a controlled way, producing a powerful, lightweight, rechargeable battery. Lux says the Nobel Committee honored the right people at last.
I mean, this is something that the lithium-ion battery community has been looking forward to for the last several years.
Take Marka Duke, a senior scientist at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory in California.
I turned on NPR and they announced it, and I jumped out of bed. I was so excited.
She says lithium-ion batteries first became commercially available in 1991. Soon after, cell phones and all kinds of other small electronic devices became commonplace.
That's really a tangible outgrowth of the work that these Nobel Prize winners did many years ago.
Back in the 1970s and 80s. She says these days, researchers are trying to tweak lithium-ion batteries to make them better for use in cars or storing energy from sustainable sources like wind or the sun.
There's a lot of effort now to try and figure out how to charge these batteries really fast without damaging them.
And people are constantly looking for new kinds of battery systems beyond lithium that might be even better. For now, though, when it comes to batteries, lithium-ion technology rules. With the Nobel Prize in Chemistry awarded, that's it for this year's Science Nobels, and no women won. 9 men shared the chemistry, physics, and medicine prizes. That didn't surprise Lisa Lotta Joufred at the University of Copenhagen. She studied gender bias in the Nobel.
The gender ratio within the Nobel laureates do not reflect the gender ratios within the field.
She wishes the Nobel Prize committees were more open about, say, how many women get nominated, because the Nobels are so high profile and have such an impact on how people see science. Nell Greenfield's Voice, NPR News.
2 years ago, a sex scandal derailed the Nobel Prize for Literature. It threw the state Swedish Academy, which awards the prize, into such turmoil that it skipped giving an award last year. The Academy has made some changes to address its problems, and this year it will give 2 Nobels, one for 2018 and another for 2019. NPR's Lynn Neary has the story.
In a normal year, says Mitchell Catlin, owner of Books and Books in Miami, the Nobel Prize is a big event. After a year's absence, he's looking forward to the announcement of the winners.
I'm thrilled to have the Nobel Prize back. And I'm thrilled for the lead this year.
Catlin says the prize often brings well-deserved attention to authors who are not well known. It also helps sell the author's books. And while Catlin was aware of the problems that engulfed the Swedish Academy 2 years ago, he says he's not heard much about it since.
There hasn't been a lot of discussion about the fact that there wasn't one last year, nor has there really been a lot of discussion among readers that there was a scandal around.
But there was a scandal, and lots of it. In late 2017, Jean-Claude Arnault, husband of Swedish Academy member Katarina Frostenson, was accused of sexual assault or harassment by 18 women. He was later found guilty of rape. Those accusations were followed by charges of financial impropriety and leaking the names of winners for gambling purposes.
It's already affected the Nobel Prize quite severely, and that is a rather big problem.
Sarah Danius was a permanent secretary of the Swedish Academy at the time, the first woman to hold that position. Danius moved to sever ties with Frostenson and Arnault. Some Academy members sided against her, and Danius stepped down under pressure. Frostenson also left the Academy, as did a number of others. Because members were appointed for life, no one could be named to replace them. Alok Yadav is an associate professor of English at George Mason University.
There was this internal crisis of just the functioning of the Academy divisions, factions, confrontations within the membership. So this produced a situation where there was a question, initially at least, of whether the Academy was going to disintegrate.
There were not enough active members to award the Nobel Prize, so instead, the Academy decided to take some time to restore confidence in the Literature Prize.
I don't think we will succeed with that this year. This will have to take time.
Mats Malm is the new permanent secretary of the Swedish Academy. Malm says there's already been some progress. Members are no longer appointed for life, and so can be replaced when they resign. And there's been a significant change in the makeup of the Nobel Literature Committee, which makes the recommendations that the full Academy votes on.
The Academy has always called for support from specialists and experts of different kinds in order to widen perspectives. But last year, a new Nobel Committee was established with 4 members of the Academy and 5 external experts.
Malm says the Academy will decide whether to keep the external experts after 2 years. George Mason University professor Yadav thinks that's a good idea. He says the new committee skews younger and has more women.
It will have a different kind of credibility. It will help widen the sense of the range of voices that are speaking in the deliberative process involved in selecting the winner.
One thing that has not changed about the Literature Prize, speculation on who will win continues and is likely to be wrong. Lynn Neary, NPR News, Washington.
Many residents of Northern and Central California are frustrated and confused today. The state's largest utility is deliberately cutting power to some 800,000 customers. Pacific Gas and Electric says it's an effort to prevent its equipment from sparking wildfires. Weather in the region is currently extremely dry and windy. Here's PG&E's Vice President of Wildfire Safety, Sumit Singh.
Given the extreme nature of this event, we have been working internally and forecasting kind of what we call a high stress scenario, which is comparable to the October 2017. What we are seeing is that this is very similar in nature, but it does have a broader footprint, especially when you look at the East Bay.
The blackouts are affecting people across large swaths of California, including the San Francisco Bay Area, where Jeremy Siegel of member station KQED is reporting. Hi there, Jeremy.
Hey, Audie.
I want to start about the area these blackouts cover. What have you learned?
So this is extremely widespread. These blackouts, they're unprecedented in their scope, and they began early this morning, and they've been rolling them out through the day and into tonight when those strong winds are expected to get pretty dangerous when it comes to fire weather. This spans far north in the Sierra Nevada foothills over into the state's Central Valley and here into the Bay Area, and it's expected to become more widespread as we get into this evening. And Audie, when we say 800,000 customers, that's certainly more than 800,000 people, because a customer is referring to, a business or a home. So these numbers are extremely high.
How long are the blackouts expected to last?
PG&E and local officials are warning that this could last up to a week. And that's because crews, once the weather subsides, are going to have to go around inspecting their lines, their equipment for damage. And because this is such a large swath of California, that could take an extremely long time. So that's why they're saying up to 7 days.
How are residents coping with all this?
It's tough for them. They're frustrated, they're confused. A big problem that people have been having is that when they've been notified, PG&E has been directing people to their website to see if their address is covered in these areas that will be losing power. The problem is when people have been going to PG&E's website, it's been going down a lot. Their website's been having a lot of problems due to high traffic. On top of that, PG&E has been giving some conflicting timelines surrounding these shutoffs. So, people are frustrated. They're confused by it. Bobby Babin-Alones, who she lives in the Oakland Hills in the East Bay here in the Bay Area, she sums up that frustration pretty nicely.
I understand the need for safety. Sort of wish that PG&E had given us more advance notice, and also that maybe the upkeep of the lines was being done more consistently.
I mentioned earlier that PG&E said they're doing this because of concerns their equipment could spark a fire during high winds that you all are experiencing there. Are blackouts the only option, though?
Well, you heard Bobby there, suggesting that PG&E could be upkeeping their lines better. That's something that elected officials have been criticizing the utility over. People have also suggested the idea of maybe putting lines underground, but you have to realize that this is, thousands of miles that their utility covers. So that would be extremely difficult and expensive. So PG&E at this point says it's their best bet to avoid another tragedy like the fire we saw that nearly destroyed the town of Paradise last November.
That's Jeremy Siegel of member station KQED in San Francisco. Thanks for your reporting.
Thank you, Audie.
NPR is giving voters a chance to talk about their most important election year issues face-to-face with presidential candidates. When our co-host Michelle Martin sat down with former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke, the conservative direction of the judicial branch was a topic of conversation. The Trump administration has now appointed about a quarter of all federal appeals court judges, in addition to 2 Supreme Court justices. O'Rourke took questions from 2 undecided voters in his hometown of El Paso. They were first-time voter Connie Martinez and civics teacher Ruben Sowell.
To me, right to privacy is a very fundamental right. And most of the discussion is around abortion and things of that sort, but it encompasses so much more. When we talk about reproductive rights, we're also talking about access to birth control, but it also affects LGBT rights. I mean, there's a number of rights that really fall under the umbrella of the right to privacy. And so my question is, how would we maybe persuade the public or edify the public to maybe support appointees who will defend that?
Can I just amplify Urban's question here a little bit, because the reality of
is the Trump administration has already put its stamp on the federal judiciary. So, I mean, obviously, if you agree with the direction that the Republicans in the Senate and the Trump administration has taken, you're fine. But if you, like Ruben, do not, what options do you really have?
You're absolutely right, Ruben. President Trump's been very successful in being able to stack these courts, to be successful in having his nominees confirmed at all levels of the federal judiciary. Imagine if he had another 4 years within which to do that. So as president, I will make sure that we nominate justices who believe in a woman's right to choose, who believe in the full civil rights of every American. And we say this from a state where it is legal, though it's not okay, but it is legal to fire somebody based on their sexual orientation. But you also talked about our right to privacy. And this is something that we are acutely sensitive to here in El Paso, where our Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search and seizure really have been suspended because of our location on the border. We have Border Patrol checks well into the interior of the U.S. Even if you have not been in Ciudad Juarez earlier today, you will be stopped. You'll be asked to show your papers. You have a different expectation of privacy in this country. When you add to that the challenges that we have in a digital economy, social media, Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, we need to be far more vigorous in being able to protect our privacy, our data. And as president, I will make that a priority, but we'll also make sure that this is a criteria for how we choose those that we nominate to federal benches.
Any other questions for the Congressman?
I have a pretty pressing question
Okay,
that
go ahead.
I've been wanting to ask, and it's in regards of immigration. And my question for you is, what are you going to do about the families that have been separated? I know that's been very controversial with President Trump, but I think that if you are elected, that is something that needs to be addressed not only immediately, but diligently. And how would you do that?
We are doing lasting damage and trauma to these children. We are torturing them every day that they're separated from their parents. So for that reason, day one, as President of the United States, we will spare no expense in finding the parents of those kids, even if they're in Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, wherever they are in the world, and reuniting them with their children, and then making sure that we help them with the long-term therapy and recovery to address the trauma that we have placed them in. So let's do that first and foremost. Agree that we will never separate another family, cage another kid, incarcerate anyone seeking shelter or refuge or asylum in this country, and then do the larger work of rewriting this country's immigration laws.
That's former Congressman Beto O'Rourke. You can watch more of his conversation with voters and our co-host Michelle Martin at npr.org/offscript.
Forex.com. Forex.com. It's your world. Trade it. Forex trading involves significant risk of loss.
And by the Alliance for Lifetime Income, an organization dedicated to educating and raising awareness about how annuities can solve retirement income needs. Because income planning that includes protected monthly income solutions helps ensure you'll never outlive your money in retirement. Find out if making annuities a vital component of your portfolio is the right choice for you. Learn more at retireyourrisk.org.
On the program today, brand name basketball and the repo market made simple. Not in the same story, by the way. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace. In New York City today, I'm Connor Risdell. It is Wednesday, the 9th of October. Good as always to have you along, everybody. We begin today with the not entirely idle speculation of what James Naismith would think of the sport that he invented these 128 years ago and the global economic context in which it finds itself. We are, of course, a long way from the peach baskets that Naismith used as the original hoops, and the global economy is nothing like it was in 1891. But a quick glance at the news, sports or otherwise, reveals basketball as the pivot point of perhaps the biggest corporate story of this day. The National Basketball Association, in the aftermath of a tweet from Houston Rockets general manager Daryl Morey last week supporting anti-government protests in Hong Kong. The response from Beijing has been swift and clear. An NBA fan event before a preseason game between the Brooklyn Nets and LA Lakers in Shanghai has been canceled. A public training session for the Nets also in Shanghai also called off. Corporate Chinese sponsorships with the NBA undone. Meanwhile, the NBA commissioner, Adam Silver, says Morey has the right to exercise his freedom of expression. It is a big, big deal, this story, with peril aplenty. So we got Marketplace's Andy Euler on the line to hash things out with us. Hey, Andy.
Hey, Kai.
So look, this is kind of basic, but clearly it seems the basics have been lost in this. The NBA has been for decades now one of the most progressive of professional sports leagues. Do you suppose that somehow they didn't see something like this coming? And if they didn't see it, why didn't they see it?
Well, that's the thing. You're getting right to it, right? The difficulty here for the NBA is that it does want to be seen as a progressive league. It doesn't want to go off brand, but the NBA also has to be weary of its brand in China. The brand is tarnished in the eyes of Chinese businesses, of consumers. That's going to prove difficult and costly for the NBA to remedy in China. This is something that every American sports league is going to take note of because they all see the money in China. They want to do business there. And I even spoke with a sports marketing professor from China. He kept telling me that the everyday business of sport in China, it's market-based, right? It's similar to doing business in the U.S. We all know that. We've heard that 100 times. Then he said, just be sure not to get on the wrong side of the government because then the market gets thrown out the window.
Well, that's so interesting. So clearly the calculation that's happened here is that the Chinese government has decided it does not need the NBA's brand to do basketball in China, right? Because they're growing their own leagues and they can, in essence, do it themselves, no matter how popular Yao Ming, the Houston Rockets, and all of those folks are over there.
But the NBA is the brand, right? Chinese basketball is NBA China, basically. When Yao Ming came onto the scene in 2002, the popularity of basketball in China skyrocketed because you had a dude out there who looked like them. You had 200 million people watch that first game. It's going to be so difficult for the Chinese government if they just want to say, look, we got this. We're going to have basketball. Basketball is great here. We have all sorts of stars. It's going to be so difficult because the other thing is Americans who don't make it to the NBA go and play in China. And so there's so much sort of meshing there with the NBA and China that's going to be so difficult for the Chinese to be able to do that.
Let us take this away from basketball for 2 seconds because the NBA is certainly not the first company that has run into trouble in China. Just today there was a controversy with Apple and one of its apps that lets people identify police in Hong Kong, and the Chinese government is displeased with that. There is wider risk. There is also wider acknowledgement of some of the challenges of doing business in China. Tipping point, do you think? I mean, spitball that for me.
That's what I kept asking the smarter people that I am about this when you're talking about sort of Chinese relations and things like that. And it's funny because everybody that I spoke with says, you know what, these are hiccups and businesses are going to have to do better at navigating business in China. Nobody is saying they're going to pull out of China. No business person thinks that because there's so much money there, we just don't see an American company just pulling out because of difficulties. So instead of let's get out of here, this is a tipping point. We don't want to deal with China anymore. It's figure out how to do business better there.
Andy Euler, got response and a bunch of other stuff for us out of KUT in Austin, Texas. Andy, thanks a bunch. Appreciate it.
You got it, guy.
Random observation, by the way, just on the whole market size dynamics of this thing. By most estimates, there are almost as many basketball fans in China, 300 million or so, as there are people in the United States, 330 million or so. So there is that. All right, we're going to leave sports behind for the moment and turn to the no less fascinating, to some of us anyway, subject of monetary policy. The Federal Reserve released the minutes of its most recent meeting today. I will spare you all the Fed speak save this tidbit. Markets, the minutes say, and here's the quote, we're currently suggesting a greater provision of accommodation at coming meetings than they saw as appropriate, they being the Fed here, and accommodation being shorthand for lower interest rates. So what that actually means, that whole thing I just read, is that maybe markets and traders and investors and everybody else are banking too much on interest rate cuts the next time the Fed meets. Next Fed meeting, by the way, for the calendar types among you, the 29th and 30th of this month. So stay tuned, as we always say about the Fed, by the way. Down at the corner of Wall Street and Broad on this rainy day in Manhattan, sunshine. Actually, we'll have the details when we do the numbers. The housing news of this Wednesday is of home values, how those values get figured out specifically. Federal banking regulators are putting a new rule into effect today that says certain home sales in the $400,000 range or below aren't going to have a traditional appraisal anymore. The old threshold, $250,000, was set back in 1994. So yes, this is partly an adjustment for inflation. But the Marketplace's Amy Scott reports it is also a recognition that once again, technology can do a lot of the work that people used to do.
The rule will apply to about 40% of home sales. It doesn't include loans backed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, for example. Loans that are exempt from an appraisal will still require an evaluation. What's the difference, you ask?
The valuation itself is data driven. So no longer is there a human in that loop, at least in terms of the value.
Alex Villacorta is head of data and analytics at real estate tech company House Canary. He says humans aren't completely out of the loop. They still inspect the property and take pictures.
To make sure the property's there, that it's in decent condition, and if it's not, highlighting whatever deficiencies may be there.
But instead of that human analyzing those photos and comparable sales to come up with a value, computer algorithms do it. That's pretty scary for the appraisal industry, which employed 80,000 people last year. Kelly Davids is senior vice president with the Appraisal Foundation, which sets the professional standards for the industry. She says algorithms work fine in places where the housing is fairly uniform.
But that doesn't happen in large swaths of America where there's nuances in the housing stock, where the data maybe isn't as current. So somebody who's really trained and ethical has to look at all of that and weed out the bad from the good.
But ethics have been a problem in the industry. Research from the Philadelphia Fed found that less than 10% of appraisals came in below the contract price. Ben Keyes is an associate professor of real estate at the Wharton School. He says appraisers may feel pressure to deliver numbers on the high side.
When we think of the robots taking over various sectors, there are certainly risks associated with that, but we have to keep in mind the risks that were in place when the market was run by humans.
For the foreseeable future, though, the humans and robots will have to get along. Measuring value still requires both. I'm Amy Scott for Marketplace.
We delve now into the minds of the driving force in this economy at this moment, you, and a zillion people like you, consumers who are, in the face of a manufacturing slowdown and global concerns and trade this and tariff that, somehow still floating this economy and keeping the expansion going. We do it, you and I and everyone, by spending money. And our willingness to spend is determined in very large part by how we feel. If we're feeling things are good, we shop. So, Marketplace's Mitchell Hartman went out to sample some feelings in Portland, Oregon.
Out by the Portland airport, there's a cluster of big box stores. Best Buy, Staples, Ross Dress for Less. I meet this shopper waiting right outside IKEA.
My name is Lori Holton. I'm 50 years old and I used to be a substitute teacher, but we have grandkids now, so I'm a stay-at-home grandma.
Holton's husband's got to get their van packed full of new kids' furniture from the busy parking lot.
That was my husband. Loop around again.
Holton's husband works for a steel fabricating company. A couple of years ago, the Trump administration's steel tariffs were a problem for the business, but now
they weathered that well and they're doing well.
Which means she feels like her family is doing well, too. Holton's like most consumers. A good economy means, first, a good job with reliable income. Still, she's cautious. Saving for retirement comes before shopping sprees.
If you spend big, can we manage to pay our house off and make our kids comfortable when we're gone?
The financial crisis and bad recession a decade ago weigh on her mind, even though no one in her family lost their job or home.
Do I believe it could happen again? Yes. I've watched the stock market rise and rise and rise, and the housing market, we could get that bubble again.
Inside IKEA, I find Anthony Caesar shopping for his 2-year-old son in the kids section. Caesar's 38. He works in a local metalworking shop. His wife Ashley's a stay-at-home mom. I ask how the economy's treating them.
I mean, it could be treating us better, that's for sure.
Caesar makes $18 an hour. The couple recently bought their first home on the outskirts of Portland.
To the overall economy, we've been fortunate. We really appreciate that, but we just paycheck to paycheck trying to make ends meet. You know, if something were to happen to me right now, like I don't have any health insurance, a couple of missed mortgage payments, and we could be out on the street with nothing.
Feeling okay about the economy right now, but not trusting it to last, that seems common. It's how 59-year-old Patty Stewart feels. She is waiting in the long IKEA checkout line to buy fixture samples for her brother's home renovation project here in Portland. She is visiting from Petoskey, Michigan, where she restores antique furniture like dining room sets.
My business is absolutely booming. It's a lost art, and I'm totally swamped.
Stewart feels like she's doing fine right now. Plenty of work, enough income and savings to make her feel secure in her personal economic situation. But the national economy?
Maybe okay now, but I don't have a whole lot of faith that it can continue, and that's really scary.
It's good to have a steady job or a thriving business, own a home, save a bit for retirement, and be able to afford some shopping at a giant Swedish furniture store. That feels like a good economy. But as for all that inspiring belief in a good economic future, not so much. I'm Mitchell Hartman for Marketplace.
Coming up, we have had to take children and keep them in a hotel or motel somewhere close.
The opioid crisis and its youngest victims straight ahead. But first, let's do the numbers. Dow Industrial's up 181 points today, 7 tenths percent, 26,346. The Nasdaq up 79.1%, 79.03 there. S&P 500 up 26.9%, 29.19 on that index. Apple polished up 1.1% today. An analyst raised his price target for the stock, citing strong sales of the iPhone 11. Microsoft firmed up 1.8%. Cybersecurity firm FireEye up 4.9% today. Denim clothing company Levi Strauss dropped 7.4% today. The firm posted better than expected revenues, but wholesale in the Americas apparently not so good. Contour, the Jones Wrangler and Lee brands, was unchanged. Bond prices fell. Yield on the 10-year Treasury note rose to 1.58%. You're listening to Marketplace.
This Marketplace podcast is brought to you by Intercom. There's no room for idle chat in business, so if email is your only moneymaker, make room for something new. Intercom. Intercom is the only business messenger that starts with real-time chat, then keeps growing your business with conversational bots and guided product tours. Take Intercom customer Unity. In just 12 months, they converted 45% more visitors through Intercom's messenger. Make room for a new revenue channel. Go to intercom.com/podcast. That's intercom.com/podcast. And by Capital One. With the Smart Cash card from Capital One, you earn unlimited 2% cash back on all of your business purchases. Think about it, unlimited 2% cash back on everything you buy for your business. And that cash back can add up to thousands of dollars, which you can reinvest back into your business so you can keep growing. Take Christina Stumble, owner of Farm Girl Flowers in San Francisco. She earned $115,000 in cash back last year with her Spark card, and then she used that money to invest in digital marketing. Imagine what unlimited 2% cash back could do for your business. See CapitalOne.com for details. What's in your wallet?
This is Marketplace. I'm Connor Risdall. Jay Powell gave a speech in Denver yesterday, and as happens basically all the time, the Fed chair's words were closely parsed. In particular, what he said about the Federal Reserve Bank of New York putting billions of dollars into something called the repo market. Repo is sort of a wonky but a critical part of the financial system, essential for keeping money moving in this economy. And the reason we bring it up is that until last month, the New York Fed hadn't really intervened in the repo market in a big way since the financial crisis. That is the cue for this next installment of our series, Kai Explains, where we take things really slow to figure out what's really going on.
Hey, Kai.
Hey, Kai. Hi, Kai.
You recently asked what's going on with this economy.
So how do these two concepts work together?
First of all, the basics.
The repo market is the foundation of the financial markets. It's really the plumbing of the system that underlies movements of cash and collateral.
Beth Hammock is now the global treasurer of Goldman Sachs.
I used to be the head of our repo trading desk.
Repo trades are a regular part of doing business for Goldman Sachs and all the rest. Short-term loans used to pay for daily operations. More than $1 trillion moves through the repo market every day, and part of the New York Fed job is keeping an eye on things, making sure all that money keeps moving like it's supposed to. In a repo trade, one financial institution in need of quick cash essentially sells something to another institution, treasury bonds most often, with the promise that they will repurchase those treasuries the next day. Repurchase, repo, get it?
Think about it as if you were going bowling.
Okay.
You'd walk up to the counter and you're wearing your fancy shoes. You need to deposit your shoes at that counter and they'll give you bowling shoes that you can borrow. You pay a small fee to do that, but they have your shoes as collateral against the bowling shoes they've given you.
Rolling with the analogy then, you're the financial institution, bank, hedge fund, whatever, that needs some short-term cash. So you trade your treasuries, your shoes.
If I need to make payroll, I can't make that with treasuries. I make that with cash.
So to the bowling alley we go.
The bowling alley is the financial market.
That is anybody who's got a bunch of cash to lend overnight.
The bowling shoes are cash or reserves.
Your shoes, the ones you trade in?
My shoes are the collateral, or in this case, the treasuries that I'm putting in.
And also,
the fee I pay to borrow those bowling shoes, that's the repo rate.
Okay, so those are the basics. What happened was that last month, mid-September or so, at this bowling alley that we call the financial markets, there was a rush on bowling shoes. Why? Well, there are a couple of theories. It was getting close to the end of the quarter. Banks had a lot going on. Taxes were due, which meant that too many banks needed cash, bowling shoes, at the same time.
And so suddenly people are paying higher and higher prices to borrow the shoes because they really want to bowl that night.
The repo rate, the fee, remember, that I pay to borrow the shoes, jumped from around 2% at the beginning of September to more than 8% on September 17th. And that is when the New York Fed said, no, we got it.
The Fed is essentially lending bowling shoes in the marketplace.
Andrew Metrick is a professor of finance at the Yale School of Management who, as it happens, studies financial crises. And this, Metrick says, is not that.
What we're seeing happening in repo markets now is very different than what happened in repo markets in 2008 during the financial crisis.
We ran Beth Hammock's bowling shoe analogy past him.
I think it's a good one.
It is, isn't it?
In the financial crisis, basically, all of a sudden, the people who run the bowling alley realized a few things.
First of all, and most importantly,
these shoes that people are giving us as collateral for the bowling shoes are actually really not so good.
In other words, in 2008, people really believed that the fancy shoes that Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers were trading in to get cash for bowling shoes, they weren't worth anything.
And once they started thinking about that, and they realized there's not enough people sitting around who can actually evaluate the creditworthiness of all these people bringing in their shoes and the quality of all the shoes they're giving, they just said, you know what? We're not giving out any bowling shoes right now until we see better collateral.
The repo market ground to a halt, and thus a financial crisis was born. That was 2008, which again is not this.
This is really very different than 11 years ago.
In 2008, the quality of the shoes was in question. Now there just aren't enough shoes to go around, which is why the Fed got involved.
There's all kinds of things to be worried about in the economy right now, but this is not one of them.
So there you go. The repo market via a trip to the bowling alley. You can tell me what you'd like explained next at marketplace.org, or you can get me on Twitter at Kai Rizdal, KAIRYSSDAL. The opioid crisis in this country is playing out in countless ways in thousands of communities in every state. It's a healthcare crisis, it's a crime and punishment crisis, and in West Virginia in particular, it's a foster care crisis too. The system there is so overwhelmed that state lawmakers voted to privatize it earlier this year, and child advocates are suing the state for failing to protect kids from abuse and neglect. Our podcast, The Uncertain Hour, has spent more than a year covering opioids, and today, as part of that work, we go inside West Virginia's foster care system. West Virginia Public Broadcasting's Roxy Todd has the first of two stories.
Circuit Court Judge Joanna Tabbitt sits at her desk, taking notes in a yellow legal pad as she reviews a stack of about a dozen cases.
Every judge that you talk to in the state of West Virginia will tell you that their dockets are completely filled with abuse and neglect cases.
Almost 9 out of every 10 of these cases involve a parent who struggles with addiction. As a judge, Tabbitt decides which children stay in foster care and which ones are reunited with their birth families. She says the ultimate goal is to get the kids back with their parents, but that only happens in about half of all cases.
The time frames are just too tight.
Usually, parents are given about a year to prove they are able to kick their addiction.
And you're not going to be able to get everyone into recovery and to get everyone where they need to be because most people do relapse. That's just part of the addiction process.
There are about 7,000 kids in foster care today in West Virginia. That's up almost 70% in 6 years. Spending has gone up too. The state estimates the state and federal government will spend more than $330 million this year on child welfare services. Foster care is part of that.
We recognize we have a child welfare crisis in this state.
Bill Crouch is with the State Department of Health and Human Resources. He says in some emergency situations, a foster home cannot be found.
We have had to take children and keep them in a hotel or motel somewhere close.
Children sometimes stay in a hotel with a social worker, or even inside a state office on a cot or a blow-up mattress. The first thing social workers do when a child needs to be removed from their home is to try to find a relative, like a grandparent. But if no relative will take them, they turn to a foster care agency, like the Children's Home Society in Charleston. On a Friday afternoon, the phones are ringing off the hook.
Happy Friday.
Miss Charlotte. Charlotte Burnett is a social worker. On this day, Burnett and her staff are often scrambling in a frenzy, trying to find someone who will take a child, even just for the weekend. Every spare inch of their building is filled with piles of donated baby clothes, car seats, and toys. Burnett trains and oversees about 30 foster families in Kanawha County. And when Child Protective Services calls looking for a family, she's the one who picks up the phone day and night.
I'm sure that those workers have been working all day to try to find a home. It's heartbreaking.
On this day, a call comes in that a home is needed immediately for 3 children, siblings.
Yeah, right now I have no idea because everybody I have right now is totally full. So
Barnett and the other social workers call every foster family on their list.
We got a slight situation here at the Charleston office and I need a little help.
By late afternoon on a Friday, a home is finally found for all 3 kids for one night. Then, the next morning, social workers enlist a wider search across the state to find a home for the long term. This type of situation is common inside West Virginia's foster care system. These kids then have to deal with the emotional fallout that comes from the chaos. And the job of helping them work through that trauma often falls on the foster parents. In Charleston, West Virginia, I'm Roxy Todd for Marketplace.
Tomorrow, Roxy's going to bring us the stories of some of those foster families. You can also check out the Uncertain Hour podcast for more on the opioid crisis. Everything you need at marketplace.org. Final note on the way out today. today in which all y'all gotta start paying attention. A survey from the Pew Research Center about technology and how it influences life in these United States. 10 questions in all. Everything from can you identify what two-factor authentication is? Just 28% said yes. To 63% knowing what phishing is, which is good, I suppose. Here is the biggie, though, for my money. Only 29% of Americans know that WhatsApp and Instagram are both owned by Facebook. You gotta pay attention. All right, we got to go. The Dow Industrial is up 181 points today, 0.7%. The Nasdaq up 79 points, 1% there. The S&P 500 rose 26 points, 0.9%, 29 and 19. Our media production team includes Sarah Bruguiere, Drew Jostad, Jeff Peters, Daniel Ramirez, Jay Siebold, Charlton Thorpe, and Ben Talladay. I'm Kai Rizdal. We will see you tomorrow, everybody. This is APM.
This Marketplace podcast is brought to you by the Capital One Spark Cash Card, offering unlimited 2% cash back on all your business purchases. Learn more at CapitalOne.com. Capital One, what's in your wallet?
I think that's about it for tonight. Whew.